Hello, everyone, and welcome to Financial Literacy Skills for the 21st Century, Evidence from PISA. My name is Patrick Gonzalez, and I work on international studies at the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES. I'm the U.S. National Project Manager for the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA. I'd like to welcome you to the RISE webinar series, which puts a spotlight on research relating to international studies and education on a bi-monthly basis. Before we get started, I'd like to highlight a few technical and logistic items. This webinar will be listen only. If you experience technical difficulty during the webinar, you can either contact the RISE team by email at the RISE email address rise@air.org or via the questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. Someone from the RISE team will assist you. You may ask questions about the presentation at any time during today's webinar by submitting your questions to the questions box in the right-hand menu. At the end of this presentation, there will be a question and answer session in which Dr. Lusardi will respond to content-related questions received throughout the webinar. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter and the subject of today's webinar. Our presenter, Dr. Anna Maria Lusardi, is the Dennett Trust Endowed Chair of Economics and Accountancy at the George Washington University School of Business. Dr. Lusardi is the founder and academic director of GWSB's Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center, or GFLEC. Previously, she was the Joel Z. and Susan Hyatt Professor of Economics at Dartmouth College, where she taught for 20 years. She has also taught at Princeton University, the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and Columbia Business School. From January to June 2008, she was a visiting scholar at Harvard Business School. She holds a PhD in economics from Princeton University and a BA in economics from Bocconi University in Milan, Italy. We're very excited to have Dr. Lusardi with us today, and at this time, I will turn things over to her. Dr. Lusardi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gonzalez. I am really delighted to be here today to talk about a topic I'm really passionate about, which is financial literacy among the young. And the main argument and the main idea behind my topic and my presentation today is that financial literacy is an essential skill to thrive in the 21st century. So I would like to start with that point, which is I would like to describe that indeed, as we look at how the economic landscape has changed, we see major changes in many markets. Just starting from the labor market, we see that workers change jobs very often. We see that wages are really diverging when we look at people with or without a college degree. There are fundamental changes in financial markets, much more complex financial products, and many more opportunities, not just to invest, but also to borrow and to take up debt. There are also fundamental changes in the education and the pension system in almost every country. We see that the cost of education is going up, and at the same time, the responsibility to save and invest for retirement has been shifted onto individuals. These changes are very fundamental, and they are driven often by, for example, structural changes, such as the increase in life expectancy. I report in this slide a graph actually taken from a report of the OECD that looks at the countries, for example, that participated in the first PISA financial literacy assessment. And as you can see, over the span of about 30 years, life expectancy has increased. Today have a much higher expectancy. The good news is that they are going to live longer, but this changes everything. It's going to change how they are going to work, it's going to change how they are going to save, it's going to change their prospect for the future. And this is why it's so important to talk about financial literacy. In order to do so and to say how equipped are people to deal with this new economic environment, with the fact that we're going to live perhaps to 100, we are going to look at data from the OECD, International Student Assessment, and I will complement that data with another source of National Financial Capability Study. So we can also look at people not just 15, people who are 18 and older, and look just briefly at the US data as well. So just to give you some preview about the PISA data, is literally the first large-scale international study that assess financial literacy among 15 years old. We have by now 2 waves. So 18 countries participated in the first assessment in 2012 and 15 participating in the 2015 financial literacy assessment. And as you can see from the list of countries provided here, there is also some overlap. So we can follow, for example, some countries over time, and in 2015, other countries have been added, so we also can enrich our sample of countries as we look at financial literacy among the young around the world. Let me start by saying, what is it that PISA measures? Not just the financial literacy, but just PISA itself. And I want to look at in a sense, what is the original measurement of PISA and the original objective of PISA that actually started as a project in 2000? The idea was to measure whether students are well prepared for future challenges, whether they can analyze, reason, and communicate effectively, whether they have the capacity to continue learning throughout life. In other words, since 2000, every 3 years, PISA looks at these questions and more. And in particular, it assesses to what extent students near the end of compulsory education have acquired some of the knowledge and skill essential for full participation in society. The reason why I'm reading this statement, which was the working statement that we had to use to design financial literacy and also to understand what PISA does, is because when I read this, I felt this is what financial literacy is. We can use almost this statement. And I think it's really such a powerful statement. And I think that PISA is such an incredible project, really visionary. Instead, what we had to do is actually really refine this statement to measure financial literacy so that we could also collect data across countries. So a group of experts was put together around 2010 to design this new module, which was for the first time added to financial literacy in 2012. And I was very happy that to get to chair this group of experts. They represented many countries and also many stakeholders. In the group of experts, we had people from Treasury departments, central banks, regulators, academic, and practitioners. So we really brought together a really important group of experts. And we worked for this assessment for about 2 years. I want to turn and really tell you the definition of financial literacy that this group of experts put together. I think it's important because so many times I'm asked, what is financial literacy? Well, now we do have a definition. Of course, this definition refers to 15 years old, but I want to mention it because when we look at financial literacy, we are not just looking simply at knowledge. And as I'll describe in a moment, we are looking at a set of characteristics. So our definition that we have used to also then design the questions to measure financial literacy across countries, and we design as many as 40 questions, relies on this definition of financial literacy, meaning Financial literacy is knowledge and understanding of financial concepts and risks, and the skills, motivation, and confidence to apply such knowledge and understanding in order to make effective decisions across a range of financial contexts to improve the financial well-being of individuals and society, and to enable participation in economic life. So I want to highlight that there are 4 innovative aspects of this definition. First of all, and I've mentioned earlier, financial literacy really does not refer only to knowledge and understanding, but it is to promote effective decision-making. We want people to be financially literate so they are better able to make the best decisions for themselves and also decisions that have an effect on society. Also, we recognize, and I think this was innovative, that the objective of financial literacy is to improve well-being. We don't want people to be financially literate just to affect a single behavior, borrow less or save more. What is best for the individual is about, what they think is important. Financial literacy we recognize as a fact not just for the individual, but also for society. And I think we have experienced over time the great cost of financial illiteracy, and it's a cost that society has paid, not just the individual. And we wanted to recognize that already in the definition. And finally, financial literacy, like reading and writing and knowledge of science, enables young people to fully participate in economic life. That's why I love the word financial literacy, as it was not possible to live and thrive in society today if you are not able to read and write. So it's not possible to thrive in society today if you don't have the basic financial literacy skills. And this is what this definition as well was trying to bring home. If I had to give a short definition of financial literacy, certainly the definition we report here is a very long one. So let me actually report a shorter one, which is my favorite definition, which is that what financial literacy is a vision for the future. Financial literacy is fundamentally about the future, is fundamentally about building our future. Building our future so that we are happier. That's why the final objective of financial literacy is individual well-being. We want to be financially literate so we can do well in our life and we can be happy. I teach a personal finance course at GW, and the first day when I describe my course, I say this is a financial literacy course and it is a happiness project. Let's now turn to the data, because we have 2 waves of data, which is described in detail in these 2 reports that I recommend everybody to read if they want to have more information about financial literacy. I'm going to report just a few data points and a few statistics to make a few important points in this presentation. And I do so by first presenting how the country scores when it comes to financial literacy, for example, in 2015. As you can see, in 2012, the first wave of the data, the countries in the green bar are the ones which are above the OECD average, the yellow are in the OECD average, and the red part are for the countries below the OECD average. And as you can see, the US sort of is in the middle at the OECD average. Let me turn to 2012 and just show you how the countries perform, how people 15 years old perform in 2015. What can we see when we look at these 2 graphs, 2012 and 2015? we see a couple of things which are important and also shown in the next graph, which is that it's not the countries with the most developed financial markets where these are not the countries where students perform the best. And in fact, the correlation with GDP explains only a small part of the variance in this score. In other words, we don't acquire financial literacy by watching the world around us. It's not that because we are born in a country with well-developed financial market or high GDP that we are automatically more financially literate. I always say we don't acquire financial literacy by breathing the air. It really requires a lot more. But another things we see by looking at these two graphs also is that the United States has not really changed in financial literacy. In fact, the score has not changed very much. So over a 3 years time period, we don't see an improvement in financial literacy among the 15-year-olds in the US. I have to say, in my own native country, Italy, we see that actually the performance has improved. And this is my second point, which is that it's possible to improve over time, and countries have done so. This is the case for Italy and Russia in a 3 years horizon. So there are also good news when it comes to financial literacy. And it's also interesting, and another good news is that for the countries that potentially were at the bottom of this distribution, and I'm talking about Italy and Brazil in 2015, what has been happening, just to tell you the power of this data, there have been major changes in those countries, and I'm going to discuss about them later on. Another things I want to discuss is the fact that not just we have a score that summarizes how students are doing in this assessment, but this score can be divided into 5 levels. The level 1 indicates actually the level of no proficiency. In other words, if you are at level 1, you are not financially literate. The level of knowledge is simply too low and not enough to even consider you financially literate. Is level 2, which is considered the baseline proficiency. Only at level 2, there is this minimum level of knowledge that a student can have, and then we can rank them up to level 5, and these are the levels where there is higher proficiency. So students have more advanced knowledge, they can operate in more context, and they are able to answer a lot more sophisticated question, looking at more sophisticated financial behavior. Now, if we look therefore at this level, we find that on average, across the OECD countries and the economies, so these are even the countries in a sense with more developed financial market, as many as 22% of the students do not have these basic financial skills. In other words, they don't have, that even a basic level of financial knowledge. And that's a high proportion. When we look at the very top, then it's only 12% of the students that have this top performance. So we have a lot of students at the bottom that are not financially literate. These students, in a sense, are not going to be able yet to fully participate to society, as we say in our definition. But let me also tell you something that I think is very important. I reported data for the US, but this is the findings, as I'm going to show in a moment, that's true for every country, which is that there is a very strong correlation between financial literacy and socioeconomic status. The small percentage actually of students who are highly financially literate, or the students in general who are more financially literate, are those who have parents which have high education, who have wealthier parents, that students that have, for example, books at home, computer at home, cultural possessions. In other words, the economic status their socioeconomic background is very, very important when it comes to financial literacy. And also the students that discuss money matter with the parents are a lot more financially literate. So that background really matter. Of course, this is correlation, but it's so important because the advantaged students, those who come from this privileged background, score almost one proficiency level more than the student coming for a more disadvantaged background. And here actually is the data that shows that this is true for every country in PISA financial literacy assessment, certainly even in the most recent wave in 2015. Why this is important? Because this is a matter of equity as well. If people do not acquire financial literacy in school, if we don't provide financial literacy in school and we rely on students to learn it by themselves, well, we are going to start unequal. And this is, I think, an important message of this data. It is important because if we look at what 15 years old do, well, many already have a bank account or a prepaid debit card. Many are already earning some income, so they are dealing already with money management, but very few have the skill even to manage a bank account. And I want to remind everybody that, for example, in the US, 15 years old have to make a very, very important financial decision, which is whether or not to go to college and how to finance that education. Student loans have grown to be $1.5 trillion in the US. And so having young people which are financially literate is even more important in a country like the US. So this data has been very influential around the world. For example, Brazil has taken steps to add financial literacy in school. In my own country, Italy, again, which also scored second to last in the first assessment, created a new financial education committee. And I'm very happy to be the director of that committee. And one of the objectives is to improve financial literacy among the young. And the committee includes a representative from the Department of Education. I want to show you some data about the older population to make another important point when it comes to this data. Taking, for example, data from the National Financial Capability Study, the most recent data in 2015, I want to show you that, if we measure financial literacy in a very, very simple way, and I am not going to read them, but I want to show you here 3 simple questions that we have used to measure financial literacy. And these questions that Olivia Mitchell and I designed and that have been added in a lot of countries around the world are basically going to measure what perhaps is that level 1 or level 1 and 2 financial literacy knowledge. Basically, we test, can people do a 2% calculation? Do they know that if there is an inflation at 2% and the interest rate is at 1, they are losing purchasing power? And do they know about risk diversification? So we ask 3 very, very simple questions. And when we look at the population in the United States, and we ask this question across all age groups, we find something which in my view is striking. First of all, we find that up to the age of 40, more or less than 1/3 of the US population know this very basic data. In other words, people are making financial decisions without that basic financial knowledge. And in addition, that financial knowledge increases very, very slowly over time. If we look at people, close to retirement, 60 to 64, only 44% know these 3 very basic concepts. If we look, for example, at the mid of the age distribution here, people perhaps 50 to 54, these are people who have lived 20 years with defined contribution pension, which have made already decisions probably about their pension, their mortgage, their debit card, their student loan. But less than 40% are financially literate. What this graph shows to me is that people are not really learning very much from making financial decisions. If we expect or we are leaving knowledge or acquiring knowledge to the individuals, well, that acquisition of knowledge seems to proceed very slowly over the life cycle and perhaps is really not happening very much. Yet again, we don't become financial literacy by just looking at the world around us, by breathing the air. This is important because financial illiteracy is expensive. In a lot of our work, which is summarized, for example, in a review article I wrote with Olivia Mitchell and published in the Journal of Economic Literature in 2014, we show that people who are less financially literate are much more likely to default and have poor borrowing behavior and often pay a lot of interest and fees when they borrow. We see that people who are not financially literate are not saving both for the long term but also for in the short term. And we see a poor investment behavior, not just in financial assets, but also in education and in entrepreneurship. So financial literacy matters, and it has consequences for the individuals and for society, as we said in our definition of financial literacy. That's why I think this data, the PISA data in particular, speaks about the important need for financial education. We need to improve the level of financial literacy. Just the level of knowledge so far are just too low to expect that people, in particular young people today, can make good financial decisions. And the young people, as I've mentioned earlier, have just very low financial knowledge, even if they live in countries with well-advanced financial markets. Financial literacy is not just acquired by living in a rich country. And because of that strong association with socioeconomic background, I think it's very, very important that we provide access to all, because otherwise we are starting unequal. There is an important issue about equity when we look at this data on financial literacy. And that's why I think it's critically important that we start in school. We need a robust intervention when we look at financial literacy. We need to provide access to all. Knowledge, by the way, starts early in life, and so are financial habits. And that's why it's important to start as early as possible, as soon as people manage money, not just in high school, but even well before. And of course, it is important that knowledge is acquired before one makes important financial decisions, not after. And it's critically important that we provide it in the school so everybody has access to financial literacy, and this is particularly important for people coming from a poor socioeconomic background. This topic is so important that we devoted an entire conference at the OECD about how to provide access to all, how to address equity, and I suggest everybody to go online and look at the program and also the presentation at that conference if you are interested in this topic. The data really shows that financial literacy works. So when provided in school, integrated into a rigorous curriculum with trained teachers, we find that those who are financially literate, those that, for example, those students have been exposed to financial literacy in states that mandated it and also that provide resources to teachers, are students that are much less likely to have problems with debt after taking the course, confirming also many other results earlier that shows that financial education improves knowledge and it has positive effect on young people. At GFLAC as well, we have done a lot of projects, and I want to talk briefly about the programs that we ourselves have done. And the message here is that I think everybody can do something for financial literacy. If you are a parent, you can ask it in your school. If you are a teacher, you can perhaps teach it to your students. As researcher at the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center, we have taken all of the data that we have seen, in particular the PISA data, and also the data from the National Financial Capability Study, and we have used it, for example, to design a program to train high school teachers to teach financial literacy. So what we have done, we have created micro-credentials so that teacher can better teach several topics, and they have kind of a way to certify that they have acquired that knowledge. In addition, we have started a personal finance course here at the George Washington University. We use a rigorous quantitative approach, and we have incorporated in that course the standards for financial literacy that were designed a few years ago for the US. So, our students, our college students can now also take a personal finance course, and we can help the teachers as well. I also want to mention a new initiative I'm particularly proud about, and this is an initiative related to Italy, where we are doing a lot of initiative on financial education. And this is, I think, a way to think a little bit outside the box when it comes to financial literacy. So there is now a museum in Turin, Italy, which is devoted to financial literacy. It's called the Museum of Saving. And as you can see from this picture, it is a museum devoted in particular to young people. And there is a little ant that is going to guide visitors throughout the museums. And it is really devoted to learning financial literacy via history, via games. It's a kind of a way to engage people in a fun way. And it's also a way to have a place where to go and learn. Museums are a place for learning, and this museum is dedicated to financial literacy. And as you can see, for example, in this picture as well, you can go and play game. You can actually read history related also to monetary history in the US, in Italy, and around the world. And it provides a very engaging way to learn. The GFLAC has been one of the founders of the International Federation of Finance Museums. So in addition to this initiative in Italy, we are now working with a lot of other museums around the world. Actually, there is one in China. In fact, there are 5 museums, finance and other museums related to financial literacy in China, in Mexico, in the US, and in Italy. And 2 years ago, when visiting the Museum of Financial Literacy in China, we have launched the Financial Literacy Manifesto. We have basically committed to improve financial literacy globally. Why a manifesto? Does it take a revolution to improve financial literacy? We think so. We think that it's really important that we step up the effort to improve financial literacy, because it is an essential skill to live in the 21st century. So we want to be at the forefront of this initiative, and we want to tackle this global problem. And this is how I would like to end, which is that financial literacy is like reading and writing. As it was not possible to participate in society without being able to read and write, today it's not possible to thrive without being financially literate. and that is incredibly important to build this skill and this human capital for the 21st century. Everybody deals with finance, and finance is now sufficiently complex that we cannot leave it to the individual to learn by himself or herself. The fundamental question we are asking ourselves when we look at financial literacy is, which future do we want to build? And this is why financial literacy is essentially a vision for the future. And I want to leave you with a quote from the founder of my own university, George Washington, the legendary president, who said that knowledge is in every country the surest basis of public happiness. And I hope he meant financial knowledge. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to come back to Dr. Gonzalez for questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lusardi, for your very interesting presentation on financial literacy and also developments around the world. I really do appreciate it. We will now begin the question and answer portion of this presentation, and Dr. Lusardi and I will answer the questions you've submitted during the webinar in the questions box. If you've not yet submitted a question, please send your questions through the question box on the right-hand panel of your screen at this time. In case you miss which questions have been asked, the RISE team will copy and paste the questions that are asked to our presenters into the chat box after they are asked aloud. For any additional questions, or if we're unable to reach your question during this Q&A session, please submit it to the RISE webinar series at rise@air.org. Now, a video and audio recording of today's webinar will be available in the coming weeks at the RISE webinar series webpage. You'll receive an email from the RISE webinar series once it has become available. You can also download the PowerPoint presentation slides from today's webinar via the handouts box in the right-hand panel of your screen. For more information on the PISA, please visit the link provided on your screen. And I will now start off the Q&A with the first question. So, Dr. Lusardi, a question that came in. So, how do we use PISA data to make a case for financial literacy in schools, given that, as you know, in the United States, it's not a national system of education. It is individuals, the states have the power, and of course, localities probably have the most power. How does one go about making a case in one's own district of the need for financial literacy using PISA?
Well, I'm very happy about this question because, first of all, now we have the PISA data, I think, to document that, for example, students in the US are at a disadvantage now when we look at other students around the world, and also that financial literacy has not improved in the US in the past 3 years. And by the way, this is not surprising. It's exactly the result I was expecting, because we just released and we hosted here at GFLAG the survey of the states that shows that only 17 states in the US make a personal finance course mandatory, and that number has not changed over time. So I think not only we can use this data to make the case, but we can also complement the data with the cost of not having financial literate students. It's a disadvantage for themselves, but it's potentially a disadvantage for society, for the states who might have, to pay more for people who might default on the student loan, who might not find a good job, or who might not save for retirement, and therefore there can be cost later on. And I also would like to say that we are also involved in such a project. We are working on this year, probably about next year, we'll be able to release a website. It is called Fastlane, which really provides for everybody who's interested in starting financial literacy, all of that information, a case for having financial literacy in the school, how to potentially even raise financial support in order to have that school, a curriculum that people can use. So, how can we make this having financial literacy in the school as possible and as easy as possible, even when it is not mandated?
Thank you for that answer. Next question. In your presentation, and of course in a lot of the financial literacy research, it talks about the role of schools, and of course, because almost every student at some point in their career goes to school, the focus has been on schools and financial literacy in schools. But what role do parents play, and how does one engage? How do you engage the parents of these students, given that many of these things, like literacy itself, like basic reading literacy, begin at home? Are there programs that are trying to also reach the parents of these students?
There are, and I think more and more as we think of financial literacy in the school, we are also thinking of how do we engage the parents. My first warning is, though, about what we see here in this data. First of all, we see that parents often are not themselves financially literate. So we have to worry a little bit about that as well, that, sometimes if we were to leave it just to the parents, perhaps, the parents might even provide the wrong lesson when it comes to financial literacy. And this is why I think it's critically important that we have it in the school. We don't leave, for example, physics or math or some of these topics that, some of the basic topics potentially a parent can teach. We actually have it formally in the school. I mean, it is sufficiently complex to have it in the schools. But then if there isn't this engagement at home, then students, might not even learn or might not even enjoy it as much as when parents are engaged. We certainly in our 5-lane project, we will try to have material for the parents as well. And I also think that parents are actually very interested in this topic. When I talk about this topic, the parents, the teachers are very passionate about this topic. So we have really, in a sense, an audience that cares about this. But I think we also need to prepare that audience to teach and to be engaged in this topic as well.
Great. Now, a follow-up question to that. So is there any research that shows whether a dedicated course in school or lessons suffused throughout the curriculum are a better approach or more effective approach to raising the financial literacy of students?
So I have an answer about the research, and then I have an answer about, my assessment of this. So the research shows, and I have reported here, that if we have a course, in an independent course in high school, and with a curriculum, a rigorous curriculum, and trained teachers, this course seems to have an effect. It seems to have an effect exactly on the behavior of young people we care about, which is dealing with debt. Because in particular in the US, this is the first financial decision that young people are going to make. So there seems to be some effectiveness there. But how about adding financial literacy just in other courses? I am all for that, of course, because I think it's going to be easier to add financial literacy into very crowded curricula, right? It's very hard to find room in the curriculum for financial literacy. But the danger of doing so is that financial literacy is not really learned well, or is not really learned as we learn every other topic. If you think about this, almost every topic from history to literature to even a language, we really learn, by starting early and doing it very simply, and then it grows over time, right? We don't learn almost any topic into one specific course, often at the end of high school. So, we also need that progression, and we need to start learning very early. So I think the ideal way to learn is to really add it even in, kindergarten, even in elementary school, and then grow and have an independent course. If this is not possible, then the second best is to add it in other courses as well, so that people can at least grasp some of the most fundamental concepts.
Great, thank you so much. Now I want to also talk a little bit about the museums of financial literacy or financial education that you mentioned, and the one in particular in Italy devoted to financial literacy. It's an interesting example of a hands-on way to teach young people and, of course, adults. Are there other of-the-box kind of ways, initiatives that are being implemented in other nations other than financial literacy museums that you could share with this audience?
Yeah, one of the things that I think people are implementing, and certainly we have seen that in the US as well, are financial literacy games. And I think that's another, out-of-the-box initiative that needs consideration, right? We can make financial literacy engaging, we can make it fun, but what I particularly like about the games are in particular the games which are a simulation. So, so that people really understand that, by playing this game and by playing it several times, what are some of the concepts. What I mean here is that, there are lots of decisions that we make only once or twice in a lifetime. It's not that we go to college many times. It's not that we retire many times or that we buy many cars and many houses. So that's actually another reason why we don't learn from experience. We don't experience these things a lot. It's not like going out and buying milk every week and trying to find out, how many times should I buy milk and where does milk spoils. So these games and simulation can actually teach, kind of this experientially without us having the possibility to do so. So I think there is a lot of potentials in financial literacy games, and a lot of countries are moving in that direction, and I think it's a quite useful direction.
And a follow-up to question to that is, in the definition of financial literacy, it includes "quote unquote" motivation and confidence to apply the knowledge and understanding of financial concepts and risks. How do you get the students to be motivated to be focused on financial literacy? Are there techniques, or is it just the usual, you just keep begging them to be motivated and telling them their future depends on it and hoping for the best?
Well, it's a very important question because, in a sense, too, we said that because, if we want to translate knowledge into behavior, right, so many other things matter, meaning you have to be motivated, you have to have the confidence. And I would like to speak about these two words in particular. I think the motivation comes from showing just how important it is. It really, really matters. And I have learned this from teaching the personal finance course in my here at the university. And I really start the first class by showing that, we are teaching the course because it matters. It matters to your life. It matters, and you can benefit a lot from this course. And I have to tell you that one of the comments that I get the most out of my students, that I find the best comment I can get from this course, is that what they tell me at the end of the course is that everybody should take this course. So I think, in the same way we are making a case for having it in the school, we can make a case for young people why they should learn this topic. We have added computers in the classroom. We have added foreign languages, right, without explaining much why we need that, right? And in my view, financial literacy is almost like that. We need to add it because it matters. Let me also turn to the topic of confidence. In order to make financial decision, you have to take the knowledge and have the confidence to make that decision. Why do I talk about confidence? Because we see in the data, confidence is very unequally distributed, in particular among a very important group, which are women and girls. So when we look at financial literacy, women disproportionately do not have the confidence to apply that knowledge. I became aware of by looking at the PISA data and by looking actually at the data across countries. This is truly a gender story because in every country we have now done a global survey of financial literacy for adults and looking at data in more than 140 countries. Well, there is a gender difference in almost all countries. The gender difference comes often from the fact that women do not have the confidence to even answer the question. I have incorporated that lack of confidence in my teaching, and now I know that there is that gender difference, and I very much encourage, in particular my female students, to do well, and I want to give them not just the knowledge, but also the confidence to act on that knowledge.
That's great. Is there anything else that you've learned from your research on gender differences in financial literacy that you can share with us?
So we have actually learned so much that we have written many papers now on these gender differences. First of all, we think that this gender difference is actually a plus. It is almost an advantage versus a disadvantage when it comes to financial literacy, because the fact that women do not have the confidence actually make them, first of all, less susceptible to problems. So in terms of financial behavior, women might actually be better equipped to make financial decisions. So my argument now is that finance should be in the hands of women because they have the best attitude toward finance. And if we educate women also, we have a multiplier effect. And the reason is women not only care about themselves, but care a lot about others. Coming back to financial literacy being important for the individual and for society. This is disproportionately so for women who, for example, care about children and care about aging parents. So educating women and targeting actually financial education to women might not only make them more able and more confident in their financial decision making, but might also spill over to other groups as well. We see this in the Hour program as well. Anytime we do a financial education program, the large majority are women. So we are now designing a lot of programs exactly tailored to women. I always say, I think women can save the world.
Good for you. Good for you. I believe that too. Following up on that, and this takes us a little bit outside of schools, but with the growth of microfinancing lending, particularly in developing countries, which, at least in my limited knowledge, it appears to a lot of women in developing countries are recipients of microfinance lending. What do you know whether do they go about providing them a financial literacy kind of education before they join these microfinance lending programs, or are we lending money to people who may not have a full knowledge and understanding of what they're doing and what it requires? The role of microfinance in generally poor countries, I guess, is what how does this work?
Yeah. Right. So you ask a very, very important question. I have heard a lot about financial inclusion, and financial inclusion now has become one of the objectives also of the G20 countries. But almost in every conference about financial inclusion, in every discussion of financial inclusion, there hasn't been as much financial literacy. And what I can say is that financial inclusion, in my view, without financial literacy is not going to work, because you cannot give any financial product to somebody who is not financially literate. You know, any financial product can be dangerous, even a checking account. So in my view, it is essential that any financial inclusion is combined with financial literacy. You know, we want to give people products that they can use. We want to provide access to financial markets, but to have a good use of those financial markets, we need people to be financially literate. So I really hope that these two projects that so far I don't think have worked together will eventually work together. My understanding of why some of these microfinance projects work is because there is indeed, and particularly for women, there is a lot of peer pressure, there is a lot of kind of peer interaction, and often there is also the teaching of financial literacy. And I would argue that perhaps this is also why these projects are successful, not because we give access to finance, but because now people are better equipped to deal with that finance.
Interesting. So that leads to a next question that I have here, and this has to do with the growing, financial tech apps and software like Mint that are available at least in probably most countries of the world. Now, do you think that those could have the effect of improving people's financial literacy, or do you think it actually masks their need for knowledge and understanding? In other words, it does the work for them so that they don't have to truly understand it. And do you know of any of these apps or fintech kind of startups that actually incorporate a kind of a financial literacy into the use of their product?
Thank you for this question. It's really, really important. Let me just say and start by saying that we just released this Monday a report which is about mobile payment user and their financial literacy and their financial behavior. Unfortunately, what this report shows is that the millennials, which use mobile payment, which really is just using our telephone to pay or to do the checkout at the cashier and so on, are disproportionately more likely to have poor financial behavior. In other words, so far the people who are attracted to use that technology seem to be the people which have worse financial skills and worse financial knowledge. So to answer your questions, I don't think that technology is a substitute for financial literacy. And I don't think it can ever be. People like for finance have to have those basic skills to really use technology for themselves and to improve themselves. Technology is a skill, like knowledge, like having a college is a skill that allows you to better use, to better understand the world. So technology in no way is a substitute for financial literacy. I would argue the opposite is true, which is that in a world now which is becoming a lot more technologically innovative, in a world where we have fintech, financial literacy is even more an essential skill.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Lusardi, thank you so much for your presentation today and the discussion that we just had. We need to wrap up a little bit. I do want to answer one question that did come in, and this had to do about the future of financial literacy in the PISA project, and whether or not it will be offered in the future. As Dr. Lusardi has already said, data has been collected in 2012. And 2015, and in the United States, we're just about to collect our third data point on financial literacy in 2018 this fall. And PISA Governing Board has agreed to offer financial literacy once again in 2021. So there is the opportunity here for even more data and kind of trends for these countries. So do keep your eyes out for more financial literacy data coming from PISA. So thank you, Dr. Lusardi, for your presentation. And what I want to say is, sorry, I'm stumbling. What I want to say is, please, to the audience members, is please let us know what you thought of today's webinar by participating in the post-webinar survey that will appear at the close of today's webinar. And you can also send your feedback to rise@air.org at any time. And thank you all for joining us today. This concludes today's RISE webinar. Thank you so much.